Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Season 2 premiere of Only Murders in the Building. Great season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I love that it's Detective Williams and that other detective, played by Michael Rappaport, and I love that he's going there talking, all saying the most horrendous stuff to both Oliver and Charles. Is kind of unnecessary, and I love the whole thing of like, he's like, right, I've worked a crime show for so long. He's like, oh, you think you're gonna fool me with this mirror? I know what's up. And she's like, Detective Williams is like, that's a decorative, the two-way mirror you're looking for is on this wall, Charles. And she's like, oh, thank you. And he's like, yeah, but you're not going to fool me, and you're not going to tell. And she's just like, sit down, Charles. And he's like, yes, ma'am. And I love the whole thing of like, when everything went from Mabel to Oliver, where it's kind of like, right, you have plenty of motive to want to kill her because she was trying to evict you from your apartment. And in that moment, Oliver was like, well, I never did. Well, to be fair, I always knew there was something off about Mabel or something like that. And Detective Williams is almost looking at him like, what, Oliver, you piece of crap. Like, why are you doing that? To be fair, he was so quick to turn on Mabel last season too, so it's like, it isn't that much of a surprise. I wonder will Mabel find out how quickly he was trying to throw her under the bus to throw suspicion off himself. But I love the whole thing of like, oh, a lawyer. It's like, oh, you want a lawyer? And she's like, no, I was asking if you're a lawyer because you're so smart. Detective Williams laughing. He's like, wait, were you laughing? She's like, I thought that was fun. What? Yeah, what she said I thought was funny. I was like, I love that. But yeah, we find out some interesting, well, it turns out Mabel doesn't remember much. Probably like, well, to be fair, they had already been drinking a little bit, so she might be, we don't know, she might be a little bit of a lightweight. Which is also sad too, when I didn't even think about it at the same time. It's like, well, she was drinking. I mean, they were all drinking and having a blast when like Zoe died. So it was like, it's almost that coming full circle to some extent. But I also was like, oh, why would they think, like, why would Mabel be the perfect patsy and stuff for this? And then it's not until they brought it up, until like the podcast brought it up of like, oh, right. I forgot, because they made a point to reference it. They've said it twice last season of her dream is to basically find someone attacking her, kick them in the nuts, and stab them to the bone with her knitting needle. To be fair, I don't think, I guess the argument could be like, well, regardless of who it is, you wanted to do it so badly, you didn't care that it was a bunny instead of like some random man attacking you or whatever. I'm like, but I think the dream won't fully come true until that happens, which that has to happen at some point in time. Like her dream, well, like her fantasy about doing that, like it has to happen at some point. So there's that element to it. But what was really interesting is finding out that Bunny wasn't stabbed with the knitting needle. Until after the fact. It was knife wounds, and she was stabbed like 8 times. And it's almost like, wait, what? She's like, you guys are trying to get me for a murder, and you don't even have the murder weapon. That's the interesting thing of it all. And it's like, yeah, they don't have enough to stick. But it's like, Detective Williams says, yeah, you have your lives, go live them. We can come charge you at any point in time. So she's like, do not investigate this. Leave this to the police. To be fair, stuff was left to the police, and they handled things. They solved 2 crimes. So it's like, yeah. But still, I guess it's also that complicated thing of when you're in the middle of the story, it complicates things. So it's like, what are we supposed to do? And she's like, what am I supposed to do? Getting to knitting? And it's like, don't be a smartass. It's like, well, it's kind of her thing. It's like, but yeah, get out of here or you're going to go to jail. I love that Oliver's also like trying to record parts of it. And it's like, Maura, stop him recording. And I'm like, Oliver, stop it. He can't help himself like multiple times throughout the episode. I even thought it was kind of that cute moment when they're in the elevator. He's like, oh, nice beats. And she's like, what? He's like, yeah, no, like, never forget I said anything. He's like, she's not wearing beats. He's like, forget I said anything. I was like, I appreciate you trying to like reminisce about like, it's the first episode of the season, how you guys first met too. Like, I love the synergy. I love you, what he was trying to go for there, really good. I thought that was really sweet, his attempt at that. So, but then there's also the Cinda situation, only murderers in the building, and she proceeded to like rip into everybody. Charles, we ended up finding out, she threw in the whole like, him and Jan situation. It's like, right, you were getting cozy with a murderer. Plus, it turns out we learned a little bit about well, because we know Charles's dad, like, because I forget, they brought that up, like, pretty early on last season, because he said that whole, like, speech, and Mabel thought, like, oh, it's from the episode, you just copied that from Brazos, but it's like, no, he was able to write that into the show, but we heard, like, his relationship with his dad, like, his dad wasn't a good person, so we know that, so it's like, now that's going to be with everything that comes up in this episode, it seems like his dad's going to be a bigger part of this story. Interesting enough, even finding out his dad has been in and out of jail. Obviously, Oliver, she throws splash in his face where he almost killed 12 people, and then also bringing up the fact that, right, she also references, I think, the notes that he's sent Bunny, it's like, wait, how do you know about that? And then Mabel, it's like, right, you're 20-something, kind of like surrounded by blood again. And that's the thing. Mabel didn't initially want anything to do with like a season 2 or anything of Only Murders in the Building, just because she'd already been surrounded. Like, so much of her life has been preoccupied by death. Like, probably like half her life at this point in time, just because of everything with Zoe and now, Tim. It's like just death just kind of like taking over my life. I want to just take a beat away from all this. Kind of hard considering like there's a hashtag out called Bloody Mabel, and there's kind of that twisted thing of people being like, ooh, she's a murderer, but she's sexy, and you know, so it's like, ugh. But she gets contacted by Alice, played by Cara Delevingne. I was like, whoa! And I was like, oh, right. I did remember hearing, like, you know, before I started watching the show, I was like, oh, yeah, I did remember hearing some casting stuff for season 2. And I was like, hey, I think I remember seeing her being cast in the show. I was like, hey, Cara, that's cool. Anytime I see her, I just think to myself, like, what is going on with Carnival Row? Like, season 2 of that. Like, God, it's already been, what, 3 years now? If not pushing 3 years? Jesus. Regardless, tangents and all that aside. So that was interesting. But also, I do like that while this is all happening, all 3 of them are getting an opportunity to kind of move forward with their lives. She gets, Alice invites her out, you know, to an art show. And it's like, right, she can kind of, you know, use her art because they like the mural that she made. And, but obviously at the art show, all you could see is people want to take a photo of her and with her because she's kind of infamous now. Oliver ends up meeting Amy Schumer, who's playing Amy Schumer. I guess she's the celebrity cameo, I guess, this season, because she's actually moving into Sting's apartment. Because there was stuff that we saw from Sting. I'm like, oh, so Sting's not going to be in this season. Okay. So he's moving out of the building. But also that Amy Schumer's kind of moving into his place, and he's like, oh, Amy Schumer. And she's like, yeah, are you Oliver Putnam? She's like, I love your podcast. It's like, she's like, yeah, you made murder cozy. And he was like, oh, because you're Oliver Putnam. And he was like, oh, only depends. Are you trying to sue me? She's like, I've only ever sued one person. That was Judd Apatow. And then the laughing just stops. And I love the whole thing of like, oh, like, she's like, yeah, like, you're like me. Like, when I first started doing comedy and I bombed at the beginning. She's like, well, just for one day. And I'm like, are there meta layers to that joke or something like that? Because I'm not like one of those people like actively like, I'm not going to get into it. But it's just like, I don't know if that was like a meta thing on her part or the show's part, just like, not necessarily bombing, but I know like a lot of people are not fans of Amy Schumer, so I'm like, I'm like, oh, I like Amy Schumer. She's, you know, so it's like, that's why I'm like, I don't know if that was like a meta joke or am I like reading too much into that or something like that. That is like her, like from her perspective, like, oh, like, I don't know if that's supposed to be like a, oh yeah, I'm so good I haven't bombed since like my first day at trying comedy, or is it just supposed to be like an even deeper layer of like her presenting like that? I don't know. Because plenty of comics bomb like at many, even in the heights of their career or whatever. Regardless, tangents and all that aside. She wants to kind of say, oh, so can you sell me the rights to your podcast? Like, oh, we could serialize it into like an 8 to 10 episode thing and gamification of it. And he's like, well, basically he's been working on like a 200-page like kind of like script and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, kind of check me. You know, he's like, oh my God, I love this building. It's like, yeah. I skipped over it, but I love when they came out because Oliver had to be the one to say something because everyone else was like, oh my God. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, because I've never gotten this much attention before. It's like, Oliver's kind of an attention whore. But I guess it's like, as an artiste, you kind of had that in you that you're like, no, I want more eyes on me. But, I love that it's just kind of like, yeah, we were free, the innocent have been released, and they're like, oh, we're live, and he's like, I'm sorry, I'm not signing right now, and he leaves. I'm like, he's too excited about this. But also, moving on to Charles, they're doing a Brazos reboot, and I thought it was going to be like, they're pitching it to him and everything. He's so excited about it. He's like, yeah, I was talking about where are the cop shows? And they're looking at him like, he's like, it's supposed to be a joke because there's, never mind. I'm like, I got it. At first I was like, what are you I was like, oh, you were being sarcastic because like TV's riddled with cop shows. And that's why I was kind of confused. I was like, okay, I see what you were being sarcastic. You were being ironic about it. But he's playing Uncle Brazos in a reboot. I was like, oh, okay, because at first I was like, are you going to not play your... So it's like, because the question is, they did say reboot, not remake. Sometimes those get interchangeable. They're not always interchangeable, because sometimes like a reboot could be like, you're just, you're continuing it, like a Doctor Who, for example. And other times it's just, I feel like remakes are probably like a lot, because I even think like, I referred to Charmed as a reboot, but I'm like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of times they're interchangeable, but there's a distinction between a remake and a reboot. But I think sometimes they can be interchangeable. Either way, just thought that was interesting. So everything's kind of looking up for them. So they need to like solve this, like clear their names, especially when Cinda's dragging them through the mud, investigating things real time. It's like, she stole our format. Did she steal our format? Oh, you mean the format of putting out episodes before we even have a crime or an ending or a suspect? And it's like, yes, then yes, she stole our format. And it's like, yeah, my lawyer hadn't passed away. I thought you said he got disbarred. This isn't about semantics, Charles. But they thinking, the moment they heard Bunny's voice, I'm like, oh, it's got to be like a parrot or something, right? Lo and behold, turns out it's a bird. And the fact is they're focusing on that bird, which I'm immediately like, it's kind of bad that it's specifically a parrot too, which will end up helping an investigation in the long run. But the bad thing is, you said all this stuff in front of the parrot, and it's going to bring that stuff back up, because they focus on why they're saying like, oh, get some notes, any bits of paper with my name on it. They're saying that in front of this parrot, who's immediately going to, I feel like, repeat that later on. Maybe. We'll see. But yeah, broken. I forgot they did have that whole point that like, oh, like that little vent of hers, like for that to be like a last season thing that was brought up like once, that they kind of bring full circle now. Because the killer probably could have, I don't know. They'd have to trace like, because that's how the killer would, because it's like, Bunny could get in and out whenever she wanted to, I'm sure, but, the killer could have easily, maybe they did, her door was locked, so either the killer took it off of Bunny, or they, went through the vent, so they didn't say anything, so, but right, someone have to, like, check in there, because maybe there's some evidence of someone else going through that vent, but only evidence that's probably going to be found is their fingerprints, like, oh, you went into that whole thing, so, we'll see how that turns out, but while they're in her apartment, there's a Uma and Howard thing, and there's a painting that's worth like $1 million that was stolen, so that doesn't look good, and then Bunny's also got that elevator that leads outside. It's like, what's that all about? Is that the only place it leads to? Because it seemed like it could have stopped other places too, but maybe that's the only, maybe it goes to her place and then that's it. I guess it's maybe something from, I'm assuming like maybe like some bootleg days, during Prohibition and stuff like that, sneaking in alcohol. It seems the Arconia does seem like it is probably one of those old buildings that has a lot of history. So maybe there's some relation in that regard with that elevator. I love that they left with some coats from Bunnies, and I'm like, that's, once again, you're just like thinking to yourself, like crime drama wise, you're like, so what's going to be a clue? What's going to be super significant? Because Mabel did remember some final words from Bunny, and it was like, first it was like 14, and then she would heard Savage or Charles. Yeah, she said Savage, and I think that made Mabel start thinking like, oh, could it be Charles? And like, she's like, no, it couldn't. Well, obviously it couldn't have been him because he was with Oliver at the time. But then you find out like, oh, what this is really about is him and his dad. because it turns out the painting that was stolen is now in Charles's room, house, and apartment, and you're like, ugh. Now it's like, okay, whoever this killer is, it's really fucking with us. So, because someone left a note saying that they wanted that painting, because it's a part of the notes, it's included in some of the notes of Oliver's that he ended up stealing. So that's interesting to know. Like, so who's the woman in the picture? I wonder, is that supposed to be Bunny? Maybe that's why she held on to the painting, because so that must have meant there was something going on between Bunny and Charles. I mean, Charles' dad back in the day, maybe. And it's like, oh, that's kind of weird and gross seeing like your dad like that. He's just kind of the final shot, just him looking so disgusted at the photo. But all of them getting together, because it's like the only way to clear their name is to battle it out with Cinda, with the podcast and such. And I love the whole, like, all three of them speaking on it, because last season they made it seem like Charles was the only one doing all the recording. Maybe, well, because obviously there's some parts of the episodes, like the Mabel stuff, like her monologue from the beginning of the series got used in the actual first episode of the podcast. So obviously what we get in the episodes is actually the podcast episodes themselves to some extent. So I'm really curious to see what they do. I don't know if he's coming back, but the actor who played Oscar, I mean, obviously where him and Mabel were, like, I'm curious if he's going to pop up this season or not. Not unless his dad wants him to have nothing to do with Mabel. Maybe that'll come up. We'll see how that all plays out. But I'm very, very excited to see ultimately where this season takes us, what reveals we get. Once again, plenty of people wanted Bunny dead, including our three prime suspects who hated her as well. But once again, so it's going to be interesting to find out where all this ends up taking us going forward. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good